it was all these different things mixed into one. All these things that I love just conformed into this one piece of art. And that art was the Spectre, Jayden Mercer.
Summon the Spectre.
What's good, y'all? Welcome to episode 12 of the SpectreVerse Podcast. I am your host, JariSpectre, aka the Spectre, Jayden Mercer, and this right here is none other than the SpectreVerse. Thank you guys for joining me on this Wednesday, wherever you may be watching or listening from. We are going to be doing something very different on this week's episode. We are not going to be touching upon the world of WWE and AEW, and as far as what those builds towards Dynasty and WrestleMania concern, we are not going to be doing any of that. We're not going to talk about the Final Four. We're not going to talk about the National Championship. However, I'm recording this prior to the National Championship game, so if by chance Michigan makes it to the championship, go blue. That's all I have to say on that. But we're going to be doing something a little different on this episode. I am going to be discussing my personal journey in professional wrestling. Now, first and foremost, and I want to make this abundantly clear, my journey's not over. The Spectre, Jayden Mercer, is not retired. He is not on sabbatical. I am simply resting my wounds from last year. I do not plan on my journey in wrestling and my career being over quite yet, but I do want to touch upon kind of my journey from when I started and before even starting, why I got into this in the first place, why I decided that wrestling was my route that I wanted to take. I'm also going to be touching upon what training was like back when I started. I'm also going to touch upon the creation of the Spectre, which I know a lot of people have been curious about how I came up with that. We're going to get into the nitty-gritty and the breakdown as to how I managed to create on paper what was a very wacky and nonsensical character, and I was able to transform it into the phenomenon that it is as far as Wisconsin independent wrestling. And with that being said, I'm also going to touch upon a lot of my reasonings behind why I did what I did. I'm going to touch upon some of the storylines, some of the things I learned along the way. And the reason I'm doing this is because, like I said, although my career is not over, I do feel like me injuring my knee last year was very much the end of an era and the start of a brand new chapter in the world of Jayden Mercer and the Spectre character. So I just want to thank you guys once again for joining me on today's episode. If you are new here, I am posting this onto the Jayden Mercer Facebook page. If you are from that page and you are watching this for the very first time, this is for you. There are 713 of you. 713 followers. Thank you for that. However, Spectre Club, I need you guys to help me out here. The ways you can do that, first and foremost, follow the SpectreVerse page on Facebook. It's at the SpectreVerse. Anytime I post any sort of video, it will go onto that page. Also, help me out here. Follow my Twitter and my Instagram. That is both at JariSpectre. It's not going to be at Jayden Mercer. I'm sure you can find Jayden Mercer if you look up the name and you find it that way. But both ats are at JariSpectre. And then also, this is the most important. I need you guys to hit a like on this video, hit the subscribe button, turn on the bell for notifications, because what this platform is what I'm going to pursue once my career is over. I won't be touching upon what exactly that might look like quite yet, but this SpectreVerse is what the next project is as far as the world of Jayden Mercer is concerned. So please, Spectre Club, follow this page on Facebook at the SpectreVerse. Follow my Twitter and my Instagram at JariSpectre. And then also hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, turn on the bell for notifications, and also leave a comment. And here's some of the prompts I'm going to throw out. What are your thoughts on the Spectre from the first time that you saw him? What is your favorite piece of merchandise that I dropped? What is your favorite match of mine, or favorite storyline, or favorite promo? Give me anything that was your favorite. And then also, please let me know what you guys want to see next as far as content on this channel might look like. Like I said, I cover wrestling once a week on here, and on the typical Thursday, I also try to go live streaming and play some video games that you guys might be interested in. And so I am very, very curious to see what you guys would like to see next. So, Spectre Club, if you guys can do all that for me, I would very, very much appreciate it. Now, before I jump right into everything, I am going to preference, once again, my career is not over. And then there's another thing I want to talk about, and that is, when will the fans finally see Jayden Mercer again? I unfortunately don't have a good estimate as to when. I will start this episode with a brief health update. I'm doing great. I am fantastic. Everything is moving along just as I expected, if not better. However, I do have 2 more doctor's appointments before I can get officially cleared. And I asked for 2 more because I've noticed towards the latter half of on the verge of being cleared that I've ran into a few minor hiccups. Like, I can tell I'm not as fast as I once was. I'm not as strong as I once was. So there's a few things I want to kind of just take the extra precaution and the right steps to get to where I feel I need to be in order to return to the ring. So as far as when you guys are going to see me next, unfortunately, this is not the grand announcement. I have no for sure as to when that could be. I'm hoping it is sometime this year. That is the best explanation and best, I would say, answer I can give as far as that question is concerned. Now, with that out of the way, let's dive into the story of Jayden Mercer. So, we're going to rewind it back. We're going to go back to 2017. This was right after I graduated high school and I got accepted into college. And I went to the College of University of Wisconsin, Stevens Point. Beautiful city. First time moving away from home. It was a good 2 hours away. And so I felt like that was a good enough distance to get away from home. But at the same time, when I went to visit campus in the summer, parts of it felt like home. So that's why I chose Point. And they also had a great art program, which was why I went to college in the first place. On top of that, a lot of my friends from high school, my good friends, were also going to Stevens Point. So I knew some pieces of my core group were going to be with me. So I knew I was going to be fine. So little Jayden Mercer goes to college. And man, oh man, I wish I could go deep into the stories of college Unfortunately, I'm not going to do that here. Needless to say, this guy was a party animal. Absolute party animal. But like any young kid going to colleges, or at least the majority of them as far as the state of Wisconsin goes, that's very normal. Absolutely normal. So, I was going to school and then tearing up basements before I hit age 21. However, during that time, you got to keep in mind, during that time, I was, or at least prior to it, I should say, so we're going to go back a little bit towards high school. I was a full-blown athlete. I was football player, basketball player, did a little bit of track, but it just wasn't for me. And then I tried amateur wrestling for one practice, because my love wasn't amateur wrestling, it was pro wrestling. But one of the wrestling coaches saw me in the gym one day, and he's like, hey, would you be willing to come try a practice? And I said, I'll try it. No guarantee I'll be good. And as that was happening, I was fresh off of a broken ankle from football, which the story of that is, it's kind of funny. So it was the third game of the conference season, and it was my high school versus one of our rivals. And on that team, on that rival team, was actually right tackle, who is now in the NFL, Luke Gedke. I believe he plays for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers as of today. I think he's still on the team. But he was actually their tight end. And he was, I want to say he was 6'4", 200 and almost 80 pounds, could run like crazy. So he was their tight end. And I was the outside linebacker. And as he caught a slant route, maybe like a quick 3-yard slant, and was going to cut right across me. And we were getting chippy. So this is like right before the third quarter is about to end. So throughout the game, we were getting chippy. I was very much the shit talker in high school as far as the football team goes. And so he runs the 3-yard slant, and he's coming my way. So what do? I lower my shoulder, and I try to take his legs out. And as I do that, my legs are stuck in the grass as I lower my shoulder right into his knees. And all 280 some pounds of him comes crashing down right on top of me. But like I said, my feet were still in the grass. And as he came down, my leg went completely snapped. Broken fibula, out for the season. And it was my senior year too. And I finally got the starting position. So I was just broken. Absolutely, physically, mentally, emotionally, I was torn. But the good news is I was able to rehab quick enough, and I was able to make it to the last game of the season. We made it far enough into the playoffs that I was able to return then. But that's besides the point. Now, we're not going to go. This is not a football podcast. This is a wrestling podcast. So I'm coming off of a broken ankle, and I'm just in the gym, just minding my business. And the wrestling coach is like, hey, I want to see you come to a practice. So I said, all right, sure. So I go to the practice, and I didn't do bad. Obviously, my technique was rather piss poor, but they saw the potential, and they're like, damn. The coach pulled me aside. He's like, I'm so fucking mad because if only you would have signed up as a freshman, you would have won state at least 2 times now. And I went, that is fair, and I appreciate it, but my heart was never in amateur wrestling. It was always in basketball and football. So that will help as I eventually start talking about the training of pro wrestling. So fast forward a little bit, we're going back to college. So it's 2018 now. And like I said, I'm going to school, getting good grades, and I'm tearing up basements left and right, sucking beers, drinking a bunch of whiskey, having the time of my life. But then one day, I hop on a scale. There was a scale that we had in the dorm room, or at least it was in one of my buddies' dorm rooms. So I said, screw it. And I hopped on the scale. When I was in high school, I weighed about 180 pounds. That was like kind of where that was my standstill, is anywhere from 175 to 180. And I went, damn. So I looked at the scale and I see that number, and that number was 245 pounds. And then from there, I looked in the mirror and I lifted up my shirt and I went, holy shit, I let myself go. And if anybody, and I mean anybody that's been in a situation where they, start slacking and they become less disciplined, and then you take a good hard look at yourself in the mirror, that's a big wake-up call. Some people, it'll go right over their heads, but for me, that was a wake-up call. I said, what the fuck am I doing? So what I decided to do, I was like, all right, you know what? I'm going to slowly start going back to the gym. You can't just hop right back into the gym right after that. It's like, let me slowly ease back into this rather than just feeling sorry for myself. Let me ease back into what made me me. So slowly starting to go back to the gym. And then I remember, I forget when it was, but I think it must have been second semester of 2018, I believe. So figure late winter, early spring, around that time. So I go to the gym and I'm on my way back and I walk into my dorm room. I'm all sweaty. And my roommate had on Monday Night Raw. And I went, oh shit, you're watching pro wrestling? I didn't even know you watched this. He's like, yeah, you watch it? I was like, dude, I've been obsessed with pro wrestling. I haven't watched it in years, but hey, I'll watch it with you. And I sat down and I watched it. And I was just looking at it. And I'm watching the TV and I was just like, I always told myself I wanted to be a pro wrestler since I was 4 years old. And here I am in college in a dorm room going for a graphic arts degree, which I'm not even sure what I want to do with it at this point. And I just kind of thought about that all night. I remember I had a dream about it and just kind of thinking to myself, what am I doing? Why am I here? What is my purpose in life? And so what I decided to do was, I was like, you know what? I think I'm going to start watching more wrestling. I enjoyed watching it. So then I watched SmackDown. And then from next door, in comes one of our very close friends who ended up being a former roommate of mine. His name is Alex Strofe. And he actually works at ESPN in the state of Wisconsin. I believe he's over in Milwaukee now. He went from ESPN Madison to now he's in ESPN Milwaukee. Doing great stuff. Shout out to you. But I remember we had a conversation and it involved wrestling. And I told him, I was like, I opened up. I was like, you know what? I've always wanted to be a pro wrestler and I just don't know how to get started. I don't know where to start. And he's like, you know what? I'll keep that in mind. And, we were just kind of shooting the shit, having fun. We were just drinking beer, so I didn't think anything of it. The next week, we're watching Monday Night Raw. And he comes storming in to my dorm room. And he says, did you know that Hornswoggle has a wrestling school in Oshkosh? And I said, no shit, really? He's like, yeah, I guess he lives in Oshkosh. So I said, all right, fine. And for those of you who are wrestling fans, you guys know this school as the ACW Academy. And so this is now 2019, late 2019. I remember that summer of 2019, I threw an email out to Nick Colucci and Hornswoggle, and I said, hey, whenever you guys have your next class, please let me know. I'm very much interested in giving it a shot. And they responded back, our next class starts in November of 2019. We would love to have you. And I said, great, sign me up. So now I'm stoked. I'm like, oh my God, I'm actually going to learn how to become a pro wrestler. This is going to be awesome. I start my very first class of pro wrestling training in November of 2019. It's right before Thanksgiving. And I'm all stoked. I'm all excited. Remember the first day, you get sat down and kind of just go over what to expect, what not to expect. But you're going to learn a lot from being at this class and learning in that ring. And I'm looking around and I was just like, this is the coolest thing I think I've ever seen. Unfortunately, though, we kind of know what happens within the next couple of months from November of 2019 till March of 2020. At this point, we're in like knee deep into the pro wrestling. We're finally doing mini matches. We're learning how to piece things together. We're learning moves. We're learning advanced moves. We're learning all of these different techniques and psychology, all of that fun stuff. And then March of 2020 hits. The world shuts down. Because yes, that happened. COVID-19 shut the world down. And what ended up happening after that? They sent us home. Everybody was locked down. I spent the majority of the time playing Call of Duty because Warzone was the height of that. And then also when I was getting sick of Warzone, I would play Fortnite because you got to think, this is 2020. This is prime Call of Duty and Fortnite. So those were like the two main games I played. And then eventually I would get into Rocket League. We would try doing Apex within the next year or so. And pretty much like that was what we were doing. Everybody was just stuck at home. So I would be hanging out with my roommates, playing video games nonstop, doing class via Zoom because there was no other way to do anything. And then on top of that, all the gyms were shut down too. So like I've gotten myself into this routine of like, okay, I'm going to go to the gym. I'm going to do school. I'm going to play games. I'm going to enjoy all these things that I love. But then the gym is shut down. So I went, crap, how am I going to keep myself in the best shape? And I said, I'm going to start eating better. So I was like, okay. I buy a bunch of eggs, a bunch of chicken. I'm like, this is stuff that I know from being an athlete in high school. It's eggs, chicken, rice, noodles, you name it. All the healthy stuff. And I ended up losing 10 pounds just by eating better. And shortly after that, the first thing that was to open up were the gyms. They said, we're going to open the gyms back up, but if you're going to be in here, you have to be masked up. And I said, all right, cool. So I finally am back in the gym. I'm wearing my mask. Then the rec court started opening up. They said, you can play basketball, but you got to play with a mask on. We all know how that goes. So I do that too. So now I'm like, okay, we're finally getting back to normalcy. And I remember during that time, we would also be doing Skype calls because Hornswoggle didn't know what Zoom was. So we would do Skype calls and we would be touching upon just what kind of wrestling we've been watching. What have we been doing in the meantime? And honestly, my class and including myself, we came back from this COVID break, quote unquote, to better than where we were when we left because everybody kind of just dialed in. We all had a group chat and we actually all held ourselves accountable while everything was shut down. So that was really, really cool. So now we're back and this is the summer of 2020. The shows are finally back up and running. Everybody in attendance has to wear a mask or at least have one. And everything's starting to get back to normal. And we're wrestling pretty much once a week at camp and at training, just constantly putting in the work, putting in the grind, which they told me that I advanced at least the majority of it was I kind of had the one up on everyone because of just my resources at college and them being able to open the gym before everybody else. And on top of that, I was eating better. And when I first started training, I totally forgot this part. My background in football and basketball helped me out tremendously because when it comes to when you're inside of the ring, we all know the bumps hurt and the moves hurt. All that stuff doesn't feel good. It's not normal for the body to absorb that kind of contact. So they said my background in being able to take a hit in football on top of my footwork from basketball, because you think about it, in basketball, you're doing a lot of cutting, a lot of shifting, a lot of moving around with your legs in order to create space or to get into an athletic form to do any sort of thing, whether it's shooting, blocking, dribbling, passing, all of that fun stuff. So they said my footwork was the thing that helped me get the one up on top of being able to take a hit. And so, like I said, we're back into training. We're back into the full swing of things. It's now Christmas of 2020, and they announced to our class that, hey, WrestlingCon 2021 will be your guys' very first match in front of a crowd, and you guys will be in the Battle Royal. And that, so we as a class are stoked because we went from 12 people, and now we're down to 5 of us. The Spectre, Jayden Mercer, Roy Cooper, a.k.a. your boy Roy, a.k.a. Nate, from what you guys know from the stream. We had Priceless Preston Palmer, a.k.a. Apris, from what you guys know in the stream. We had Jamie, a.k.a. Jimmy Ocean, a.k.a. Jimothy, from what the Wisconsin wrestling fans know him as. And then we had Loverboy Luke Pierce, who was a wrestler, eventually turned into a special guest ring announcer and commentator throughout the state. So that was our group. That was my class. And we were taught by Hornswoggle, Nick Colucci, the Freak Show Killer, Salem Crane, Miles Mason, a little bit of Shane Hills, and a few other special guests along the way. And so we finally get the call that, hey, you guys finally graduated. You're going to be in your very first match in a battle royal. It's going to be great. And so here I am. I'm super excited. But also, we were given the task of we need to come up with a character. This is where the Spectre, Jayden Mercer, starts to become a reality. They said, over COVID, we're going to track back a little bit, we need to come up with 3 different characters that we could see ourselves portraying. So I really got to think. I was like, what characters do I naturally gravitate towards? And just who do I see myself playing? Am I a comedy wrestler? And I was like, no. Am I a legitimate wrestler? I said, yeah. And pretty much like take inspirations from things that you love or that you know you would be good at. But the problem was I couldn't really grasp onto anything, and that's because I liked so many different things. My avenues of what I like are very, very wide and very, very long. And so I really had to like think about this for a second. So I pitched, the first original character I pitched was the outlaw Jairus Walker. And that is very much like an outlaw cowboy, old Western styled character. Kind of like Arthur from Red Dead Redemption in a sense, like very much that grungy, old school cowboy that is just willing to do whatever it takes. So that was pitch number 1. They said no. Pitch number 2 was Jayden Walker. No nickname, no nothing, but every inspiration came from Heath Ledger's The Joker from The Dark Knight. That was pitch number 2. They said no. They said it's already been done before. We need something else. So now I'm sitting there, I'm like, crap. Well, that was my 2 big ones that I knew I would be confident in doing. So I went, shit, what do I do? And I went home after that practice and I just kind of like, I went to the bathroom and I looked in the mirror. And I don't know what caused anything to happen, but I just remember I was staring at myself in the mirror and I looked at myself and I said, who am I? And what makes me me? And as I'm staring at myself, thinking, what makes me me? I went back to a very real story and a very real part of my life So, this is context. I am the middle child of my family. And anybody that knows or is a middle child, they know they are considered the forgotten ones. Because 99.9% of the time, the parents are either worried about the oldest or the youngest. If you're that middle child, you're kind of just stuck in that in-between. And so for I wouldn't say a lot of my life, but for parts of my life, I did feel forgotten about. And I do feel like that some of the attention was on my siblings versus me. And that drove me to become very angry. I remember there was a time where my older brother said I was just a ticking time bomb waiting to go off, because on top of that, I was a very quiet individual. I didn't say a whole lot to anybody unless I knew them. And so I was just kind of like that quiet ticking time bomb that nobody really paid attention to. And as I'm like telling myself this out loud, I'm like, wait a second, there's something here. And so I started doing a little more digging. I'm like, okay, think back to when JariSpectre was like 6 years old and you felt that. Think back to when you felt that. What did you do? And I said, well, as I'm talking to myself, I was like, it made me feel angry at the world. And then I was like, the more I'm thinking about this, the more this is starting to sound like more of a heel character, which I was like, that's great. Because although I'm not necessarily the biggest, the fastest, the strongest, I know there's something in me that I can be different. Somehow, some way, I can make myself different. And so I think back to that time when I was very little and I was feeling that way and I was angry at the world, but at the same time, I was afraid of having all that attention drawn towards me, because although as the middle child, I wanted the attention, but the problem is I was afraid of the attention. So that is pretty much the start of what ended up becoming the Spectre Jayden Mercer as you all know it today. It was that feeling of being forgotten, of being alone, and all he ever wanted was a true friend that he could always rely on. But he never had that, which caused him to then be angry at the world and just to wanted to see everything burn. And I was like, that's it. So now I'm like, okay, I have my character. I have the story of the character. I need a name and I need a unique look. And I was like, okay, what is this character going to look like? And that is where I was like, okay, I have a graphic arts degree. I'm going to draw up some pants. And while I'm doing all this art stuff and I'm coming up with my gear, on TV, I'm watching, I forget what pay-per-view it was off the top of my head, but they were in Australia. I think it was, man, it's going to bug me. It was a WWE pay-per-view over in Australia. I forget the name of it, and it's going to piss me off until I actually remember it. But I was watching, I believe it was Cedric Alexander versus Buddy Murphy for the Cruiserweight title. And I said, that Buddy Murphy guy, I like his look. And I kind of see a lot of the things that I love about wrestling in him. And so I said, screw it. I'm going to have the Buddy Murphy tights. So I was like, okay, I got my base down. I'm going to do kick pads, knee pads, and the Buddy Murphy tights. But now what? And I was like thinking to myself, I'm like, okay, you're going to graphic arts school. I need a logo. And I was like, crap, what kind of logo do I do? And the more I'm thinking about this, I said, you know what? This is getting a little too much. We'll come back to a logo in a little while. What is the name? And so what I do, keep in mind, I'm still in college. I hop on WWE 2K19. That's right. I went to WWE 2K19 and I started to I put my computer down and I was like, maybe I should just make him on the video game. Maybe that might help. So I'm playing the video game. I'm creating my superstar. And I go to the end where you have to do your name, where you're from, your weight, all that fun stuff. Never mind attributes, but let's get to there. And they had, as far as J, they had James, Jayden, Javen, Jared, and I think there was a few others, but those were the ones that stuck out to me. And I was like, I always liked the name Jayden. I don't know why, but I always did. So I was like, all right, we're going to pick Jayden. Now, what's my last name? And as I'm scrolling through and I'm reading off all the last names that they had, I was just like, nothing is sticking. But then I get to the letter M, and they had a couple cool ones, and Mercer was one of them. So I put it together, and I pressed, I think it was Y on my Xbox controller, and all of a sudden, the announcer goes, Jayden Mercer. I'm like, Jayden Mercer. Jayden Mercer. I'm like, that sounds cool. I think I got my name, Jayden Mercer. So I wrote that down, and I was like, all right, great. Now, I always loved nicknames or monikers in pro wrestling. Like, I love Latino Heat Eddie Guerrero. I love The Animal Batista. I love the Heartbreak Kid, Shawn Michaels, The Game, Triple H, Stone Cold, Steve Austin. I love those cool monikers that can go along with the name. But now what's mine? And I thought about it. I was like, the feeling of being forgotten, left alone. And I was like, the more I'm thinking about this, I'm like, the more it's starting to feel like I'm like covered up to people. I'm like a ghost. And I was like, let's do the ghost Jayden Mercer. And I was like, no, that sounds hokey. That sounds weird. And that can very much easily be like people will throw on like a fucking blanket and poke holes through it and be like, oh, I'm the ghost. And I was like, that's too corny. So then I think about it and I look up synonyms for ghost and Spectre pops up. And there were two different spellings. There was Specter, which is the American version. And then there was Spectre, which was over in England. And now why I chose to go the one over in England, I wish I had a legitimate answer for you, but I don't. I think I just preferred that spelling versus the American way. But either way, I was like, oh my God, the Spectre Jayden Mercer. That's the name. I have my character, or at least I have the story of the character. I have all these different things. And the more that, like, once I finally, like, hit the nail on the head, that's when things really started turning. I was, like, thinking, I'm like, I can have this unique way of doing promos. I can be just this angry guy. And because I always feel covered up, what if I had something with me? I don't know what it could be, but maybe I could have something. And then I thought about it and I went, oh my God. I've always been fascinated by unique helmets and masks. I think back to the days where I was like 7 or 8 years old playing Mortal Kombat and you got Scorpion with the cool mask, Sub-Zero, you had Ermac, you had Noob, Cybot, you have all of these different characters. And I really started thinking more. I was like, that goes into like what I like with music. Granted, I like a lot of different genres. I love hip hop. I love R&B. I love country because I'm a farmer at the end of the day. But I was like, I also love metal. And that made me think, I was like, I love Slipknot and they wear masks. I love Mushroomhead and they wear masks. I love Hollywood Undead. They wear masks and they're probably my personal favorite type of mask that's out there because it's a little bit of like that modern style. And I went, oh my God, I think I just struck gold here. And now I'm like, okay, well, what does this mask look like? Where can I find one? So I go on Amazon and I come across an airsoft helmet It wasn't even a mask, it was a helmet. And I was like, sweet. It's $20 on Amazon. I'm going to buy it. And so I buy it and it comes to me and I'm like, well, what do I do with it? It can't just be like one blank color. And so what I did is I just took black and white and I just started painting it. And as I'm painting it, it's whatever was flowing through my body. That is what ended up becoming the original mask. This right here is the original mask that the Spectre Jayden Mercer debuted in and slowly started to make his name in. This mask itself was $20 on Amazon. And then all of this was just me being creative with my God-given ability of being able to do art. And I went, I think we struck gold here with this. And so I pitched this idea to Hornswoggle and Nick Colucci and Salem Crane. And they were hesitant because they said that's a lot of, like, this is a very detailed character. We were not expecting this. But let's give it a shot. And as the more we start to see this practiced out at training, the more we can kind of tweak it. And I said, great, let's do it. And so I bring the mask with me to practice every single week. And the original idea was the mask was just for my entrance. It's the symbolism, and it still always was and still always is. The mask is a symbolism of that feeling covered up, like you're hidden. That's what the mask symbolizes. It's not just a cool prop. It is the symbol of always feeling like you're covered up, that nobody's actually paying attention to you. And so rather fighting that fear of wanting attention and wishing you got it, now you're accepting that I will never get this attention. So how else am I going to get attention? I know. I'll put on the mask. And then people will see me for who I am and that I'm the monster. That was the original idea and always has been the original idea of the mask. The more we would use it in training and stuff like that, I was like, oh, maybe we could use the mask as like a weapon. Almost like Finley Shillelagh back in the day. That was like my original thought process, and it can help me win matches. And then one of the coaches threw out the idea, what if the mask talks? What if it's your friend? And I said, well, what do you mean? It's just a mask. They're like, yes. But what if it has some sort of entity or some sort of voice inside of it that it's trying to communicate to you, and that's why you hold it so near and dear to your heart, rather than just the symbolism, because you think about it, the symbolism is great, but how do you convey that to an audience of hundreds of people if this is their first time seeing you? You can't do that. But what you can do is you can convey that it's trying to talk to you or that it's trying to consume you. And the more I thought about it, I was like, you're right. And so that was my character from 2021, my very first match. It was in April. We're almost coming up on year 6 as a full-time professional wrestler. And that was my character when I started, the Spectre, Jayden Mercer. And it's crazy to see the evolution of what that character became, because for the first couple of years, I was just the guy with the mask. But I was half decent in the ring. Like that, me being good in the ring, or not even good, but you guys get what I'm trying to say. Being passable in the ring for my first year or two helped me out a lot. I released my very first shirt and I was so happy with that. And it sold pretty decent. And then I remember I would go to ICW down in Milwaukee, and for the first time ever, I was being portrayed as a babyface when I first started, because I'm just a young kid. And this character is so unique and so different, and his wrestling style is so different. Obviously, you're going to be a baby. You're going to be that high-flying underdog babyface. And I said, great, let's do it. And then that's where I won my first title, the Midwest title, down in ICW. And then shortly after that, I won the alternative title. But after I won the Midwest title, then WPW came calling over in Green Bay. They wanted to see what the Spectre Jayden Mercer was all about. So I go there. And there I'm being portrayed as a heel. And I'm as this very much Undertaker-esque character with this mask. And they actually were the ones that really kind of like dove into like be more of like the sadistic Undertaker / Randy Orton of the roster. Be like that really whacked out kooky guy. And I said, okay, great. Then ACW, the place that I train, the place that I call home, they put me on a summer show after I got a few more reps outside of the promotion. And then that's where I was introduced there. And from there, the first couple matches, I was working with the likes of Salem Crane, who was a main eventer. I was working with Nick Colucci, who was a main eventer. I was working with Chris Bogger, who was a main eventer. And I got those important reps in to help me get better quicker, which I very much appreciate everybody for. Thank you. Thank you very much. And then that is where, shortly after that, OFE over towards Sheboygan area started calling. And they wanted me. And so I show up and I wrestle for them too. And they're like, you're doing great. Like, at this point, I'm like, the Spectre is off and running. Here we go. And keep in mind, during this time, my long-term goal is I want to be a WWE superstar, just like everybody else. Obviously, that didn't end up happening, and I'm completely and utterly okay with that. But I was like, I got to just go. I got to grind. I got to, be the best. And so what I did over time is like, my hair was starting to get longer. And people were looking at me, and I was like, I feel like I look a little too much like Buddy Matthews or Buddy Murphy. And so I cut my hair, and I just became short-haired Jayden Mercer. And I was like, that was a nice change of pace, because I actually, for that long hair, if you guys saw me back in 2021, 2022, I'm sorry, that hairdo wasn't a good look. So I cut my hair. And then I wrestle Skits, a.k.a. Skyler, over at OFE. And we kind of having this nice little feud. And it eventually led to Skits taking control of Jayden Mercer. And I was like, well, Skits has that really cool face paint. I feel like I need some face paint too. And so I start playing around with this idea of face paint and all this fun stuff. And what I came up with was what you guys fell in love with. It was the darkness around the eyes and that little bit of dripping and almost like Venom crawling, because Venom is my favorite villain of all time. But that Venom almost like trying to come out and almost looked like a demon was trying to possess me, which made me think back to the demon inside of the mask. So that, wherever I went, although per storyline at OFE, that's what it was. But anywhere else I went, people started to understand what the Spectre Jayden Mercer was. Because before then, I was just, you saw this. This was it. With a mask. Which it worked for a little bit. But just that extra element of paint on my face, it portrayed it bigger. And way more than words possibly could to an audience. And then from there, shortly after I paint my face, there were a bunch of releases that happened in WWE. And one of those releases was Aleister Black. And we all know what happened with Aleister Black when he went to AEW. He became Malachi Black. And the House of Black essentially took off and was running like crazy. But he had the one on his eye. So it was starting to make me think, well, crap. His look is very, very similar to mine. So I was getting a little nervous and also a little bit mad because now I'm like, crap, I'm going to have to change my entire character. But I was like, do I necessarily have to? So I was like, I was doing paint on both eyes. He's just doing it on the one. And although the entrance is kind of similar, there's still a huge difference. I was like, I had the Buddy Murphy shorts. Like, there's still some sort of difference there. But then, shortly after that, and this was almost like a 1-2 punch. So first, the Malachi Black stuff. And secondly, the Shawn Spears returning to NXT as the chairman. But ironically enough, that same mask that I was holding before was the exact same mask that Shawn Spears was wearing. And if you don't believe me, here's a picture right here. You see that? You can't tell me that mask is not identical, other than the paint. Because it is. It is the exact same mask. I guarantee he bought that shit on Amazon too. Don't want to call Shawn Spears or Malachi Black out like that, but I'm just saying. But with all jokes aside, let's get back to it. So I was like, well, I think for now I'm going to stick with the 2-eye face paint. I do like it. And the cool thing is eventually I can let it kind of just be whatever it wants to be. I could be creative with the paint and stuff like that. And then shortly after that, Now That's Wrestling started wanting to get the Spectre. And so I joined Now That's Wrestling. And so I'm at like the 7 or 8 different promotions throughout the state. And just off and running on the races. And I decided, I was like, you know what? I think enough is enough. I want tights. I think I was getting to the point where the Buddy Murphy shorts were starting to wear and tear, and it was starting to get a little out of control, and I knew my grandmother could not fix it. So I was like, screw it, I'm going to buy brand new gear. And that's where the first iteration of tights came. And I kept the S logo on the knee pads. I made the cross on the kick pads. And I was like, it's all these things that I love finally integrated. And I feel like I'm finally reaching like towards my final form of what I wanted the Spectre character to look like. And I also took a lot of inspirations from other different things. Like one of the inspirations for the Spectre was obviously Bray Wyatt. The Fiend character was definitely one of them. Undertaker was one of them. Malachi Black was definitely one of them. The House of Black were one of them. And that's just in the world of wrestling. As far as things outside of wrestling, it was all these things that I loved. It was Hollywood Undead. It was the Green Goblin from Spider-Man. That's where the idea of talking to the mask originated from. It was Venom being my favorite character. It was the music I was listening to. It was all these different things mixed into one. All these things that I love just conformed into this one piece of art. And that art was the Spectre, Jayden Mercer. And then shortly after that, I said, how else can I be different? And I decided I needed more merchandise. So what did I do? I released this original Spectre hat. It's got the Spectre logo on it. And those sold pretty good. I released my very first hoodie, which I'm wearing right now. These pretty much sold out wherever I went. I remember I would have to order hoodies. I think I ordered like 3 different sets of hoodies because you, the fans, the Spectre Club, loved them so much. And as far as when I do return to wrestling, hopefully, like I said at the beginning, sometime this year, there will be more hoodies. You guys, I know for a fact, have been calling for more hoodies. And when I come back, there will be hoodies. I can guarantee you that. And so I release all this different merchandise. I'm making good money on the indies, just kind of, I wouldn't say like good money, but like indie money, especially in the black hole known as Wisconsin. I'm living it up. I'm having fun. And then I start winning. Keep in mind, during this entire time, there were a few companies I was winning. Now That's Wrestling, I was winning. I was Mid-Valley champion pretty much right off the rip. And then I became now world champion, like a show in between. And that was it. So like there, I was bona fide champion, which thank you, Now That's Wrestling. Very, very much appreciative of everything. On top of that, then I went back. I was still doing ICW, and that's when I became world champion. And they were like, you know what? We want to turn you heel. We want to see what this heel Spectre actually looks like. And that's where I really found my groove. Being able to be that sadistic heel in a rated R environment. That's where I thrived. And then when WPW eventually turned into HWE, being able to go there and be the Spectre, although it took some time, once I went there, people either remembered me from WPW years ago, or they knew of me because I got my name out there so much. And that's not even touching on the majority of ACW stuff. ACW, I love it because it helped me grow. And on top of that, that's where, although I wasn't always necessarily in title pictures right away, I was able to portray the story. I could have creative input on what I was doing, which was very much appreciated. And I know it's still like that to this day. And I can't thank ACW nearly enough. But that's where everything was starting to flow. I was having match of the year at year 2. I mean, it's crazy to say this, but me and Miles Mason versus the Players Club back then. I mean, you want to think way back then. And then shortly after that, getting that match of the year, then I started consistently putting out banger after banger after banger. I remember I went into Wrestling Con, and it is on the Jayden Mercer YouTube page. If you guys click this link right up here, this will take you to the Jayden Mercer YouTube channel, where I have a slew of matches of mine that I hold the most proud moments of. That's where I had Preston Palmer and Big Cat in a triple threat at Wrestling Con, and that was pretty much the footprint on what I made Wrestling Con shortly after that. The year after that, I got the opportunity to tell a long-term story with Salem Crane about what the Spectre truly was. Wrestling Con 2024, it ended up being Nick Nemeth versus Salem Crane and Jayden Mercer versus Jay Lethal, which we'll touch upon here in a second. The original creative idea was me versus Salem Crane in the one final blow-off match, and that is where the fans were able to see the demon for the very first time, the demon Spectre. Because Finn Balor's portrayal of the demon was something that always fascinated me back then. And I was like, I feel like that has to be the final blow-off to the Spectre character, is the demon finally reveals himself, and that's what helps me get over the hump and finally beat that guy. However, that's not what happened. Because Salem and I were putting on banger after banger, we both got gifted opportunities to wrestle celebrities. He got to, like I said, wrestle Nick Nemeth, and I got to wrestle Jay Lethal. And it is by far the highest regarded match that I have ever had that I hold. It is the number one match that I've ever done. Obviously, because Jay Lethal is the pro that he is. But 2, it was like lightning in a bottle that night. It's something that you can't duplicate, replicate. It was just from start to end, everything about that just, in my opinion, it went as beautifully as I could have ever imagined. And that is what kicked off, as far as ACW goes, that's what kicked off the uprise of the Spectre. that's where I was starting to get ideas that, Spectre could win the Rumble. Spectre could go on to do this at Anniversary. Spectre needs a title. Because I already won the trophy. Now let's get him into the title picture. And that's where I started feuding with Miles Mason. And Miles and I love Miles. Him and I have such great chemistry, and we both have that unique style where if we were to show up at a show, and this is a little behind the scenes, we go, hey, you got any ideas on what you want to do? No. Do you? No. Okay, well, let's revisit it in like 3 minutes. I'll shoot you an idea. And then as soon as one idea is passed, now we're going back and forth. Okay, you do that. I could do this. We could do this. And now we're like just getting all giddy. Like anytime I got to wrestle Miles, I would get giddy because I was like, oh, this is going to be so much fun. And you guys saw how that ended. And it ended at Tanner's last year, February, Super Bowl Sunday, in a tables, ladders, and chairs match, which is the second, if not right below the Jay Lethal match. That is my favorite match I've ever had. Because everything about that match was perfect. It was perfectly executed. Timing of everything was perfect. The story was perfect. Everything about that just fell right into place. And then 2 months after that, I'm finally Water City champion. I'm about to go into Water City Wrestling Con again to wrestle Kevon Lee, which we knew and the fans knew that was going to be a banger. 2 months after I win the Water City title, I go off the top rope doing my entrance, which keep in mind that Water City title that I was holding was at least 50 to 65 pounds. Like that title was heavy. That's why it wasn't hung up at Tanner's in the first place. So I'm holding it up and I'm doing my signature pose on the top rope where I lift my arms out like this and I'm holding up the title and I hop down off the top rope and I feel a pop in my knee. And thankfully, with the help of Miles, because he is an absolute pro, we got through the match. But as I jumped off that top rope, I heard a pop and my immediate face went to shock and anger. And also, I uttered under my breath, I said, motherfucker, as I raised that title up. And then as soon as I give the title to the referee, I am just holding my knee. And he is asking if everything's all right. And I was like, we're going to find out. And so I get through the match. We get through it. It was still a very fun match. But as soon as I got to the locker room, I was like, something's wrong. Like something is terribly, terribly wrong. And it was getting to the point where I could barely put weight on it. And I said, you know what? I'm going to go home. I'm going to ice it. And I'm just going to take it easy. And hopefully I just tweaked it and that I'll be ready for Wrestling Con. The next day I couldn't walk. I legitimately could not walk. I limped to work. And then as the day progressed at work, I was like, I can't do this anymore. I need to go see a doctor. And so I went to urgent care and they then went off with me and they gave me to a knee specialist. And I remember that day I went in with my girlfriend right next to my side and he does one simple movement in my leg and he said, oh boy. And I said, what? He's like, I don't want to say anything quite yet until we get an MRI done, but I think that's a torn ACL. And I went, great. Torn ACL. Got it. And then right after that, the rest is history. I had to announce at Water City Wrestling Con last year that I was officially injured and I had to vacate the title. Even though I never lost, I had to vacate my spot. And since then, I've been at home. I've been in the gym trying to get back to 100%. But obviously we know there's hiccups and things that come along. And then that is actually what started this, the SpectreVerse. So I'm hoping that is enough to cover the story of the Spectre. Obviously, I'm sure I missed out on a few things here and there that we can eventually touch upon right here on this channel. But if you guys enjoyed it, please feel free to hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, turn on the bell for notifications, leave a comment, let me know what's your favorite match of Jayden Mercer, what's your favorite moment with Jayden Mercer in it. If there's any questions that I didn't touch upon, please feel free to throw them in the comments. I will try to get to as many of them as I possibly can. And I'm hoping that this next chapter of the Spectre, it's going to be a very different one. And it's going to be very, very fun. But until next week, where I discuss WrestleMania preview and predictions, we will simply see you all next time. Peace out.
Summon the Spectre.